and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. Our focus today is the backyard. Many homeowners invest time and money to improve their landscape, and trees and shrubs are often the focal points. But all of that effort can be wasted if you don't know the proper pruning techniques. It's also important to know that the best time for pruning is when your trees and shrubs are dormant. So before the trees bud, we're heading to the UVM Hort Farm, where UVM horticulturalist Leonard Perry and Burlington City arborist Vijay Kome take us through the basics of pruning.
Thank you so much, Vijay, for spending some time today to show us about pruning. And we're by a small tree. What needs doing on this?
Well, I always say that it's best to start pruning at a young age because we can avoid structural defects in the tree as it grows and matures if we prune it early. So what our objective with younger trees is essentially to maintain a strong central leader with well-placed and well-spaced lateral branches. And what we want to avoid here, you have to understand, as this tree grows, the space between the branches does not increase. It actually decreases as the branches grow in diameter. So on a tree like this, we may do some thinning cuts, but primarily what we want to avoid is what we're seeing at this crotch in the tree here, where this lateral branch is growing quite rapidly and is eventually going to compete with the central leader, and we're going to end up with a codominant stem with a very bad branch connection here. So in the case of this tree, I'd like to remove this now at an early age. It's frozen.
There he goes. So I noticed, Vijay, you cut it right close. Is that a proper place to be looking?
Yeah, well, a proper pruning cut is made on the outside edge of the branch collar. So we essentially have trunk tissue, branch tissue, and this transition zone is a branch collar. So we're making our cut on a slight angle right on the outside edge of this branch collar.
I noticed you used a hand clipper, so I'd have a little problem with that. I'd use something like this, the loppers, to get in there. And even if you can't get in close, sometimes I'd just, if it's a bigger branch, take off a lot and then come in with something to do more fine tuning.
Yep, that'd be a handy tool on a larger branch like this. It's hard to get around with a hand pruner.
And then if it's even bigger, this is a ratcheting lopper I really like. It's a real big branch that kind of ratchets and you can really get down on it. So, and I know one of the things too, you mentioned you have what are called bypass pruners with kind of an angle.
So the blade on these passes by the base of the pruner, and you can make a much cleaner cut where an anvil type pruner, the blade is coming down on a surface and there can be more crushing of the tissue rather than a good clean cut.
Okay, so I know that's the one I tend to use a lot, and again, I might use that to get off the first part and then come in when you have most of the branch off to use the other one. So we've seen that, we've seen the proper spacing there. Where do we go next?
Well, on a tree like this, we've got two very closely spaced branches here, so we're going to make a decision to remove this branch here, open up some space, so long term the tree is going to have well-spaced branches as it grows and develops.
So I guess we have some trees that you'd like to show us next that are more mature.
Yeah, we're going to look at some more mature trees and look at some structural issues with those trees that could have been avoided had they been pruned properly at a younger age.
Okay, let's go take a look at those.
Okay.
Well, Vijay, we have a more mature elm here. What's the problem here?
Well, this is a great example, Leonard, of a tree that was not pruned for structure at an early age. And what we see here are three competing leaders of equal size, and you'll notice this crease here and here. We refer to this as included bark. And so as this tree, as these trunks grow in diameter, this is a very weak connection. And with heavy wind loading, snow or ice, this is where we see the failures. So in heavy storms, thunderstorms, when we see partial tree failures, this is where we see it. So when this tree was very young, both of these should have been removed at a very young age and let that central leader develop with better lateral branching.
So I guess the question is, at this stage, is there anything you can do? Can you take those out at some point?
It's too late here to do anything about this. Elms are a species that are predisposed to this sort of structure, so good pruning at a very young age is very important.
Well, we've got a older crabapple that I know needs some pruning. Let's go take a look at that.
All right.
Well, Vijay, we have an old mature crabapple. Tell us about this and what needs doing.
Well, crabapples are a common ornamental tree, and it's always good to keep the canopy sort of open for good airflow and light penetration. It tends to cut down on leaf fungus disease problems. So when I approach a tree like this, the first thing I want to do is look at the overall structure of the tree, and before we make any decisions on removing branches, we want to remove 4 things: dead, diseased, dying, and damaged branches. We know that's got to come out of the tree, so if we get rid of that first, then we can see what we have left to work with. So I'm noticing a branch here, Leonard, that's been damaged. It's got some damage here, an old scar, and it's also crossing over the limb behind you.
It's going to rub the bark off, and that'll be a chance for disease to get in and other issues.
So this would be a good candidate for a branch to remove.
Okay, well let's
so
take
again,
that off.
we would make that pruning cut back here where the branch collar is, right on the outside edge. And I prefer to use a pruning saw for a cut this size, good sharp pruning saw. So I would come in here and make this cut right here, and you can support that branch for me.
Making it right close there, so there we go.
Okay. So when we make a proper pruning cut like this, over time we're going to start to see callus formation around the edge of this pruning cut. And eventually it's going to seal itself off.
Well, I think over here we have a good example of one that wasn't done properly. It's not callusing, and then one on the other side it is. So
right, so when we leave a stub, we never get that callus formation, and we can start to get decay back into the tree because it never has the opportunity to seal itself off.
So that's a good point there. The tool used is great to have a saw like that if you're going to do a lot. I like this folding hand saw. I've got one like you, but I've also got this one that I can just take in the field, you know, for small branches, and it's a real good quality one too. It just folds up and you can go in the pocket. And what about for higher limbs? I notice you have a pole saw there?
Yeah, for higher limbs, we've got a pole saw here in the background, and you know, you can reach up there without having to get on a ladder, without having to climb in the tree, and great tool.
You just want to make sure if you're doing branches up there, especially bigger ones, that you have some proper protection on and don't let that branch come down
good
on top
idea to
of
have
you.
eye protection on for twigs coming down, sawdust in your eyes, and not be underneath what you're cutting.
Right, and not be underneath, and if it's bigger, even some sort of helmet would be good too, in case it does take a wrong turn and don't want it to hit you. But you got a big one here. Tell us about this.
Yeah, when you're taking off a larger branch here, if you can't support the weight of the branch as you're cutting it, what can happen is if we started to make the cut here, we could get tearing of the bark, which would tear down into the main trunk of the tree. So on a branch like this, we do a simple 3-step pruning cut. So what I'm going to do is come out here and I'm going to make an undercut, maybe a third of the way into the branch. And then I'm going to come outside of that cut from the top down.
So away from the trees.
Away from the tree. And when I do that, it'll break away. You see how when that started to tear, it broke now.
And it just broke that one part, it didn't come all the way down.
Right. Now we're left with this stub, which we can support with one hand while we make our proper pruning cut back here at the branch collar.
Okay. So yeah, we'll take that right out. And so again, making that branch collar, not too much into the trunk, but not too far out. That should heal over with that good callus growth, you know, once the tree starts growing again. May take a few years, I guess, for the size of that one, but
yeah, and that's why we want to make our pruning cuts at an earlier age, because because the larger the cut, the larger the wound, the longer it takes to seal itself off with that callus tissue.
And one of the tools that I've gotten recently that I really like is this pole chainsaw, and it's a battery operator, which is great, rechargeable battery. I use that for the bigger cuts. Like for here, I would use that maybe for the one out here, but then come with a finer saw because it's real rough cut.
Right.
It wouldn't make that clean cut you want here, so I'd come in with a finer saw. But or if you have a lot of big branches you want to cut out, just I think the main thing is when using a chainsaw, like anything, all the proper protection for the eyes, head, and just know what you're doing with that. A lot of safety precautions with the chainsaw and how to use those.
So in a tree like this, Leonard, you see a lot of sucker growth. These water sprouts are often referred to. Very fast growing back towards the center of the tree. It'd be a good idea to remove those. And then out on the ends, we're doing some thinning cuts to get rid of those crossing and rubbing branches.
And I noticed one, as we're talking here, obviously was done, not done proper. Right here, these two branches just totally crossing over, the bark's gone in there, and that's bad, but you can't do much about it at this stage, I think.
Yep.
Well, I know we've pretty much covered this crabapple, but you wanted to mention something about lilacs. Why don't we go take a look at those?
Sure.
Well, VJ, we have a lilac here with lots of branches all over. How do we deal with this?
Well, I get a lot of questions about how do I keep my lilac looking good. And as lilacs get older, they tend to get really leggy. You get large stems. And of course, a lot of the lilacs sucker from the base. So to keep them, in good shape, over time, you want to come in and remove some of these larger canes. So in a plant like this, in any given year, you might come in and remove 3 of the 8 or 10 canes. These larger canes, larger stems, remove those. We see we've got a lot of young growth coming up here and sucker growth.
These are the smaller, lighter green or lighter colored ones.
And they grow a couple of feet a year sometimes. So by removing some of the larger canes, letting more light in there, those are going to grow up very quickly, and we can keep that plant in a more juvenile state.
So maybe about 1/3 of the growth at any one year, no more than that.
No more than that.
And here's a good example of one here that's crossing, and it's rubbing the bark right there off.
Yep.
And so that's something you want to watch for. I notice that's a big problem. And tell us about this. Got all these newer shoots coming up off of it, but it's an older one. Would you take that whole branch out?
I would remove that whole cane in favor of some of these younger ones in here. And another thing to be aware of with lilacs, if you're, some people want to reduce the height of them, keep in mind that lilacs flower on the previous season's growth. In other words, in late winter or fall, the buds that we see out on the ends here, the terminal buds, those are your flower buds. So if we're cutting back the height of these now, we're removing our flower buds for next year.
So if you come in and you prune it all back in the spring, then you've pruned off all those flowers.
That's right, and you're going to have to wait another year.
Okay, well, could you summarize for us at the end some of the key tips we've covered today about pruning?
Well, it's really important with trees for structure to start pruning early, at an early age. We can mitigate a lot of the structural problems that can lead to failures down the road if we start pruning early, and sometimes it's just those few critical cuts to eliminate codominant stems and so forth. And when you approach any tree to prune, remove the 4 Ds before you do any other pruning: dead, diseased, dying, or damaged. Because then you're left with what you've got to work with. All that stuff's got to come out of the tree. It gives you a better picture. I tell people, stand back every once in a while and look at what you're doing. You can't replace a branch after you removed it. So make good cuts. Use sharp tools, proper tool for the job, make it easier on yourself. And make that proper pruning cut in the proper place at the outside of that branch collar, right on that outside edge. We're not flush cutting to the trunk and cutting into the trunk tissue, and we're not leaving branch stubs.
Okay, well, thank you so much, EJ, for your time today and all these great tips on pruning. And thank you for watching today on Across the Fence. For the University of Vermont, I'm Leonard Perry.